When you have more than a couple of data objects, you can manage them in app memory using Java collections. The most commonly used of these are the list and map interfaces, using concrete implementations, ArrayList, and HashMap. The list is an ordered collection, like a resizable array, and the map is an unordered collection of key-value pairs. If you're unfamiliar with these Java interfaces and classes, you can learn about them in the course Java Essential Training in the chapter Using Data Collections. Eventually, my app's data will be stored persistently on the device in an SQL-like database or some other storage format, but it'll be easier at the start to have some static data. So I'm going to create a Java class named Sample Data Provider that will define and provide the needed data. This will be a temporary class as I build my application, so I'm going to create a new package for it that I'll name Sample. And then I'll add the new class to that package. And again, I'll name it Sample Data Provider. Within the class, I'll create two collections. They'll both be public and they'll both be static. And the first one will be a list. The list items will be instances of my new data item class that I've created previously. And because it's in a different package, I'll get an import for that class at the top. And I'll name it Data Item List. The next field will also be public and static, and it'll be an instance of the map interface. The map interface has two generic declarations. The first is the key of each item, and the second is the associated value. In my app, each data item will be referenced by its primary key, which, as I described in a previous video, will be typed as a string. So I'll set the first generic declaration as string, and then that key will reference the full data item. So the value will be data item. I'll make sure that the map interface has been imported, and then I'll name this data item map. Now these are static fields. To initialize them, I'll need a static initializer block. I'll type static and put in a pair of braces, and then within the static initializer block, I'll initialize both objects. I'll say data item list equals new array list, and the array list class is a concrete implementation of the list interface, and then I'll initialize the map, and I'll set that with data item map equals new hash map. And again, hash map is a concrete class implementing the map interface. At the bottom of the class, I'll add a static method that accepts an instance of the data item class and adds it to both the list and the map. It'll be private and static, and it'll return void, and it'll be named add item, and it'll receive a single argument typed as data item. Within the method, I'll add a reference to the data item to each of the two collections. I'll add it to the list with data item list.add, and I'll pass in the data item, and then I'll call data item.map, and that uses the put method, and I'll pass in both the primary key and the item reference. I'll get the primary key from the getItemID method of the item, and then I'll pass in the data item object as the referenced value. So now both the collections have references to the single item. Now I need some data, and I'll get that from a GIST that I've already prepared. I'll go to a browser and go to git.io/viu lowercase and then uppercase di, and that expands to the GIST I'm looking for. And here's all the data I'm interested in. I'll select all of the calls to the add item method, and then I'll copy that to the clipboard. Then I'll go back to Android Studio and I'll paste this into the static block. And now I have a whole bunch of data to work with in my application. Now I'll go back to the main activity class. In the main activity, I'll create a reference to the list version of the data as a persistent field. So I'll place that right up here, and I'll say it's a list referencing data item just like before, and I'll make sure that the list interface has been imported, and I'll name it data item list, and I'll make sure that everything's properly reformatted. Now I'm going to get the reference to that list by calling the static field of the sample data provider. I'll call sample data provider.data item list, and now I have all that data available to the activity class. Next, I'll go down to the onCreate method. I'll change the initial call to the setText method, and I'll set the value to just an empty string. Then I'll loop through the data. I'll use a for each loop. I'll type for each and press Tab, and then each time through the loop, I'll work with an instance of the data item class that I'll get from the data item list. I'm going to comment out the code that had created a single instance of the data item so I don't have a naming collision with the variable named item. Then within the for loop, I'll use tvout and I'll append to the current text view, and I'll pass in the name of the current data item with item.getItemName, and then I'll append a line feed. And I'm ready to test my app with my data collection. And there's the result. All of the data items are listed one line at a time. Now, if I want to sort that data alphabetically, I'll add just a little bit more code here. I'll place the cursor right before the loop, and I'll add this bit of code. I'll say collections.sort, and then I'll pass in the data item list. Now, I'm sorting complex objects rather than simple values, so I need to create an instance of Java's comparator interface. And I'll do that with this code. I'll say new comparator, and notice that it automatically sets the generic type as data item. And then I'll set the return value as follows. I'll say return o1.getItemName.compareTo, and then I'll pass in o2.getItemName. And this automatically returns the appropriate value to control the sorting. And then I'll run the app again. And now my data is sorted alphabetically. By placing the data into a Java data collection, you get access to all sorts of programmatic tools that let you manipulate that data. In the next few videos, I'll describe a couple of more sophisticated ways of displaying this data.